It's time for an updated look at the best case scenario for the Democrats in the 2026 governor's election. The last time I did this was in May, and I'll take a look at the Republicans again in a future video. But today it's just for the Dems. So we're a little bit closer to those elections, but we're still more than a year off. So still a lot of questions about the candidates and the specific national environment, but I did make a few tweaks. And the safe assumption is it should benefit the Dems at least a little bit. But every state is unique, so let's get started. Let's start with the safe states. These are expected to be 10 or more point margins or otherwise not competitive. But again, this is mostly how it looks right now while also trying to project ahead a little bit. If candidates actually change or something comes up, then we'll make more adjustments. So first we'll start with the Dems. Most of these on a regular night, they're already going to get safe. But we're going to start with Hawaii. Then I'm going to bump Oregon up to safe. This is a blue state, but they don't really elect their governors by overwhelming margins. And Tina Kotek is vulnerable. But the Republicans don't seem to really have anything going on. And with that national environment, I think the Dems could top out here at over 10 points. Then it's the open seats in California, Colorado, and New Mexico. Dems could have some primary battles in all of these states. California is pretty open. I'm going to assume in Colorado it's going to be Michael Bennet. And in New Mexico, I'm leaning toward Deb Haaland. The next safe state is Minnesota. I would think Tim Walz is going to run for a third term, but if it's not, the politics of this state still puts this top rating at safe D. Next, it's Illinois. Then in the Northeast, it's Maine. It's an open seat, but if everything lines up here for the Dems, I don't think safe is out of the question. Then in Vermont, this all depends on if Phil Scott decides not to run. The Lieutenant Governor, John Rogers, could make a run for the GOP. But with a lot of unknowns here, I think the Dems could easily get this progressive state over 10 points. It's also going to be safe in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. Not much to say there except for Rhode Island. Dan McKee is unpopular, but he was also unpopular when he won 4 years ago by over 10 points. If somehow it's not McKee, I would still put it at safe, but it is early. We'll see what happens. Then we've also got Maryland. Westmore should be a shoo-in here. Then we've also got New York State. In this scenario, whoever it is for the Dems getting it over 10 is not at all unreasonable. One last state in this tier is Pennsylvania. If somehow it was not Josh Shapiro, then this could change. But I think it's going to be him. He does seem to be popular. 10 points here, again, not unreasonable. Now we'll do the safe states for the Republicans. So even on a great night for the Dems, it's still going to stay safe red in Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, Nebraska, now that Dan Osborne is not going to run for governor, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Alabama. Could something crazy happen and things change? Yeah, that's always possible. But for now, Dems have little to no bench in these states, and they're just way too red. Now we'll go down to the likely states. These are expected to be between 5 and 10 points or are semi-competitive. For the Dems, I've got just one state that's going to be right in the Rust Belt. It's Michigan. Now this state has some interesting dynamics. It is an open seat. We've got to get through primaries, but it looks most likely that it's going to be Jocelyn Benson for the Dems and John James for the GOP. But there's another twist. Mayor of Detroit, Mike Duggan, is running as an independent. Now, given he was a Democrat and he's from Detroit, you'd think he'd pull away more from Benson than James. That remains to be seen, but he is polling well into double digits. A lot of times third-party support fizzles out, so we'll see what Duggan does over the coming months. However, in this top of the mountain scenario for the Dems, with Trump in the White House, and given the around 10-point margins for the Dems here in the last two elections, I think this getting over 5 points is not at all unreasonable. At the same time, I don't think it would hit 10 points. Since it's an open seat, there's always a chance voters are looking for a change here. So that's why this rating is at about 5 to 6 points, and it's going to go likely. Now we'll do the likely states for the Republicans. We've got a couple of them. First is South Carolina. Here it's a weak bench for the Dems, a packed one for the Republicans. It's still a red enough state that I think Republicans would be likely to hold this no matter what. But in this blue wave scenario, it is going to come down to likely Republican. The last likely state is Florida. This is another open seat, but we all know how red this state has gotten over the past several elections. If the Dems had a fantastic candidate and the Republicans had a weak one, then it could actually be competitive. But for right now, I still think it's a little bit more reasonable to keep this rating over 5 points. You could put it at leans, but I'm tired of underestimating the Republican strength in this state, so I'm going to keep it at likely. Now we'll go down to the most competitive states. Lean are under 5%, tilt are 1% or less. We'll go through them one by one. Let's start in Alaska. This state has a ton of range to it. It is fairly red, but they do have some quirky politics here. If the Dems get their ideal candidate, Mary Peltola, and that seems reasonable that it could happen, then they do have a chance to flip this. It's totally unclear who it would be for the Republicans. There's also ranked choice voting. So all things considered, I think this would be a flip and a pickup, and it's going to go lean for the Dems. But again, there is a lot of range in this state. Next, let's do the silver state. It's Nevada. Here we've got Republican Joe Lombardo. The Dems are running AG Aaron Ford. He doesn't seem like a terrible candidate, but the problem is Lombardo is reasonably popular. So this is definitely a purple state. Dems are hoping a big blue wave develops, so anything could happen, but my rating for this scenario is that it's going to be a tilt for the Dems. I think they'd be able to just barely pick it up. Right next door, let's do Arizona. I'll make this quick. I think Katie Hobbs, the Democrat, would be able to hold this with a lean rating. Now we're going to head east and do Kansas. Now here's a state that has outgoing Democrat Laura Kelly, and the overall lean of the state is pretty red, so Republicans seemed likely to be able to flip it back. However, in a blue wave scenario, just like in 2018 when Kelly first won, it's always possible they decide they like having divided government. So I think it's possible that whichever Democrat it is, could be a state senator, they're able to thread the needle and narrowly hold this again. So right now, in the optimal scenario, this rating is going to stay a tilt for the Dems. Now let's go down to Texas. Here we're looking at Greg Abbott running for term number 4. Everybody knows what happened after the last presidential election. This state did not get any bluer, but this is going to be 2 years later. The winds could always blow back toward the left. Maybe there's some backlash toward Abbott with the whole redistricting process. Anything's possible. We've got to see who the Dems are actually going to put up. But for this, I still think it's red. It's about a 4.5 point margin. It's close to likely, but I'm going to put it at lean for the Republicans. Next in Iowa, here's another open seat. Unpopular Republican Governor Kim Reynolds is on her way out. Dems have their only statewide elected official, Rob Sand, running for governor. I'm going to assume it's him. For the Republicans, it could be any one of a few candidates. So there's some decent range here as well. The state is fairly red, but for governor, Dems can't totally lose hope. I think it's possible they could pick it up, but for right now, I think it's just going to be on the other side and stay red. It could change, but on a great night for the Dems, it's going to be a tilt for the Republicans. The next state is Wisconsin. Now we know it's actually an open seat here. Tony Evers, he's not running for a third term, so it should be more competitive. But again, this is a blue wave. Trump is also in the White House. I think it's too early to say who the nominees are going to be, but this state has had some seriously competitive elections for governor the last several times, so this rating is close to likely. I think it's about 4.5 to 5 points. That's going to be just enough to put this on the other side and put it lean D. Next, it's Ohio. Here's another open seat. Looks like Dems might have Amy Acton. Republicans look like they have Vivek Ramaswamy. I don't think there's a whole lot to say here. This is a Trump-friendly state, and yeah, things could always change, including in this type of scenario. So it'll be interesting to see how they both run their campaigns. And it was close here in 2018, but it was a massive blowout here for DeWine in 22. So we'll see what develops, but for right now, this is still going to be a lean Republican rating. Next, in the Northeast, it's New Hampshire. This is 2-year terms here. We've got Kelly Ayotte. She just won her first term last November. I think she's likely to run again. Dems have far more success running for federal offices, less so statewide. For now, it doesn't look like Ayotte is weak or Dems have the ideal candidate to take her on. But in this scenario, of course, it would become much more competitive. However, I still think Republicans would hold it, and they're going to get it with a tilt rating. The last state is Georgia. Here's another state that could have interesting primaries on both sides. I'm still waiting to see if Stacey Abrams is going to run for a third consecutive time. Either way, considering the scenario and the changing Atlanta suburbs, I think it's fair to say that the rating here would go blue. It's not going to be overwhelming, probably 2 or 3 points, but that is going to be enough for this to go leans, and it's going to be a pickup for the Dems. So that's it. That comes out to 22 seats for the Dems, 14 for the GOP. And in this scenario, Dems do get 3 flips. They get Alaska, Nevada, and Georgia. They barely hang on in Kansas, and they're right on the cusp in Iowa and New Hampshire. The other states of Ohio, Texas, South Carolina, and Florida, they get closer to the conversation, but I still think they're on the outside. But like all these states, it all depends on what happens. Who are the candidates? How do they run their campaigns? Are there any scandals? What happens with Trump in the White House? How much does that affect the national environment? All of that could affect these ratings by a few points. One one way or the other. So you can always make tweaks. Maybe you take Oregon down to likely. Maybe you put Wisconsin up to likely. Maybe Kansas is still red. Maybe Arizona is even bluer. Most of that is fair game. You could do it any way you'd like. But eventually, this is the map that I finally settled on. So let me know in the comments, how does your best D scenario look for the month of August? What are you taking a look at in these primaries? How do you think the general election is going to go? Are you open to something coming up and things changing in a couple of these states that you're not expecting? Let me know what you think down below on your way out. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join if you'd like to support the channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.